Welcome to the History of Tattoos. My name is Samantha Afonso, and I'm going to take you on a 5,000-year journey through the evolution of tattoos. Let's begin. Humans have marked their bodies with tattoos for thousands of years. These permanent designs can be simple or elaborate, but they almost always represent a deeper, more personal meaning. Tattoos have served as talismans, declarations of love, status symbols, signs of religious belief, adornments, and even forms of punishment. As you can see in the top right-hand photo, during the Holocaust, prisoners were tattooed with numbers so Nazi soldiers could keep track of all of them. In the photo below, there's a 3-tiered drawing of a Japanese man. During the Edo era in Japan, non-violent criminals were tattooed on their foreheads as punishment. There was a sort of 3-strike policy for criminals before they were sentenced to death. They would literally draw a line on the forehead of the criminal to symbolize each strike or crime they committed. This presentation is going to consist of 2 major parts. The first part is a historical overview of the history of tattoos, sort of a tattoo timeline. The second part is going to be the fun part, the evolution of different tattoo styles and where their influences came from. So to begin with the history of tattoos, the very beginning started with Otzi. Otzi the Iceman is the oldest preserved mummy scientists have ever discovered and is believed to have lived around 3,300 BC. He was discovered near the Simulan mountain on the border of Italy and Austria. Scientists discovered that Otzi had over 50 carbon tattoos, including groups of short, parallel, vertical lines along both sides of the lumbar spine, a cruciform mark behind the right knee, and various marks around both ankles. After radiological examination of his bones, they were able to prove that there was age-conditioned or strain-induced degeneration in these areas marked with tattoos. There was especially wear and tear along the spine and degeneration in the kneecaps. It has been speculated that these tattoos may have been related to some sort of pain relief treatment similar to acupressure or acupuncture. If so, this is at least 2,000 years before their previously known earliest use in China. Unlike present-day tattooing, carbon tattoos were not produced with needles, rather made through small incisions to the skin and rubbed with charcoal, and it is believed that this form of pain relief, this was used as a form of pain relief during this time. Ancient Egypt. Egypt is generally accepted as the cradle of tattoo art, and by the Middle Kingdom, tattoos seem to have been popular and culturally acceptable. Several mummies have been recovered that date back as early as the Z dynasty, which existed between the years of 2160 and 1944 BC. They usually exhibit tattoos as an art form during this time period. One of the most famous of the early mummies that were discovered is Amunet, a priestess of the goddess Hathor in Thebes. This female mummy displayed several lines and dots tattooed about her body. The tattoo patterns and markings were still clearly visible on her flesh at the time of her recovery. Several other female mummies from this period show similar tattoos in addition to ornamental scarring, which is still popular today in some parts of Africa across the lower part of the abdomen. The series of dots and dashes was believed to have held fertility-promoting significance. The patterns are said to be connected to the primal female power of the universe, motherhood. There was definitely a connection between tattoos and the divine that existed in ancient Egypt. Beyond the geometric designs that were favored, other designs discovered were found that they were intrinsically connected to religion. Mummies dating back to roughly 1300 BC are tattooed with pictographs symbolizing Neith, again, pardon my pronunciation, a prominent female deity. Another common tattoo symbolic of the divine was that of Bes, a very basic protector of the home. Oftentimes, female dancers and musicians were tattooed with Bes on their inner thigh. He was especially known for protecting women and children, providing an easy childbirth, and conception itself. Henna tattoos. The name henna also refers to the dye prepared from the plant and the art of temporary tattooing based on those dyes. Henna was first used as a hair dye as well as for dyeing fabrics like silk, wool, and leather. Henna is the Arabic word used to describe the tattoos, whereas the Hindu religion refers to it as mehndi, and styles and meanings can vary region to region. Some researchers argue that the art of henna tattooing originated in ancient India, while others claim it was brought to India by Egyptians. Some will even contend that that the tradition of applying henna to the body began in the Middle East and North Africa in ancient times. Archaeological research indicates henna was used in ancient Egypt to stain the fingers and toes of pharaohs prior to mummification. But research also argues that the pharaohs were not the only Egyptians to use henna. Ancient Egyptians and many indigenous people around the world believed that the naturally derived red substances in henna had qualities that improved human awareness of the earth's energies. It was therefore applied to help people keep in touch with their spirituality. Henna has been used for centuries for body decoration. Ancient Egyptians used henna prior to mummification. People all over the world continue to use henna primarily for cosmetic purposes. However, in countries where henna is rooted in historical tradition, members of the working class more commonly apply henna for medicinal and healing purposes, as well as a connection to the spirit. The art form of henna, or mehndi, varies from region to region. Varying designs have different meaning for the members of each culture, such as good health, fertility, wisdom, protection, and spiritual enlightenment. While Arabic henna designs are usually large floral patterns on the hands and feet, as seen in the photo to the left, Indian mehndi involves fine, thin lines for lacy, floral, and paisley patterns covering the entire hands, forearms, feet, and shins, and you can see an example of that in the top right corner. African henna typically exists of bold geometric designs, which I personally think is the coolest one. You can see that in the bottom left-hand corner. Romans and Greeks. Tattooing was only associated with barbarians during this time. The Greeks learned tattooing from Persians, and they usually used it to mark slaves and criminals so they would be identified if they tried to escape. The Romans in turn adopted practices from the Greeks, and when the Roman army consisted largely of mercenaries, they were also tattooed so that deserters could be identified. Many Greek and Roman authors mentioned tattooing also as a form of punishment. Plato thought individuals guilty of sacrilege should be tattooed and banished. A little extreme in my opinion, but hey, what are you going to do? During the 6th century, tattoos were found on the hands of soldiers and even documented the Roman technique for tattooing, which included first washing the area to be tattooed with leek juice, known for its antiseptic properties. Aetius, a Roman doctor, even went so far as to document the formula for the tattooing ink, which combined Egyptian pinewood, corroded bronze, gall, and vitriol with more leek juice. The design was pricked into the skin with pointed needles until blood was drawn, and then the ink was rubbed into it. The Latin word for tattoo was stigma, and the original meaning is actually reflected in modern dictionaries as a prick with a pointed instrument, a distinguishing mark cut into the flesh of a slave or criminal, and a mark of disgrace or reproach. Because of the disgrace associated with tattooing, Greek and Roman physicians did a brisk business in tattoo removal, and Aetius actually had a recipe for that as well. There are 2 different prescriptions of sorts, one involving lime, gypsum, and sodium carbonate, and the other involving pepper, rue, and honey. They would first clean the tattoo with niter, smear them with resin or terebinth, which is a type of plant, and then they would bandage the tattoo for 5 days. On the 6th day, they would prick the tattoos with a pin, sponge away the blood, and then spread a little salt on the pricks. Ouch. Afterwards, they would spread one of the aforementioned prescriptions on the tattoo and then cover with a linen bandage. It is said that within 20 days of the tattoo being bandaged, the tattoo would actually be gone without much of a scar. How much of that's actually true, I'm not sure, because that actually sounds less painful than the lasers we have today for tattoo removals, but hey, according to Aetius, it didn't leave a scar. During the early Roman Empire, slaves exported to Asia were tattooed "tax paid." Words and even full sentences were inscribed on the bodies of slaves and convicts, both as an identification and punishment. A common phrase etched into the forehead of Roman slaves was, "Stop me, I'm a runaway." As Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire, the tattooing of slaves and criminals was gradually abandoned. The Roman Emperor Constantine, as seen, actually there's not a picture of him, but he actually declared Christianity as the official religion of the empire in 325 AD, and decreed that a man who had been condemned to fight as a gladiator or to work in the mines should be tattooed on the legs or hands, but not on the face, so that the face, which had been formed in the image of divine beauty, should not be defiled, and should be defiled as little as possible. In 787 AD, Pope Hadrian said that he forbade tattooing of any kind, and popes who followed him continued this tradition. It is the reason that tattooing was virtually unknown in the Christian world until the 19th century. Switching over to the Greek background on tattoos, over 40 painted vases dating back to the 4th century AD portray the murder of Orpheus, which you can actually see. There's a vase in the bottom left-hand corner, and then also the painting above it is portrayed on vases. Orpheus, who according to myth was inconsolable after the death of his wife. He therefore avoided women and turned his amorous attentions to young men whom he hypnotized and seduced with music. The jilted fiancés and wives of these young men took revenge by hacking Orpheus to pieces with a remarkable variety of instruments, which included swords, scythes, lances, double-blade axes, skewers, pestles, and rocks. It's interesting that they keep track of all of these things. According to myth, Thracian women were tattooed to commemorate their victory over Orpheus, and it has been speculated that these tattoos also served to remind Thracian husbands what fate awaited them if they proved to be unfaithful. Maybe that's where the expression, "hell hath no fury like a woman's scorn," came from? Imagine if that was allowed in today's world. I honestly cannot. On to Christianity and Islam. In 330 AD, the first Christian emperor, Constantine, banned the practice, like I had said earlier, of tattooing the faces in convicts, gladiators, and soldiers, because the human face reflected the image of divine beauty. It was common belief in Christian and Islam cultures that tattoos and piercings should be frowned upon, because the Bible directly states, you shall not make any cuttings in your flesh or tattoo any marks upon you. I am the Lord. St. Paul also says, do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, which you have from God? So really, until the 19th century, which isn't going to come up until a little while longer, you didn't really see a popularity of tattoos in the Christianity and Islam cultures. The Edo era in Japan. Japan has a complicated relationship with tattoos over its history. Unlike in most Western countries, where it is simply considered a form of expression or drunkenly poor decisions, tattoos are generally looked down upon in Japanese society, despite having some of the best artists and techniques in the world, which we'll actually get into a little bit later. Their tattoo artists are really spectacular. However, during the Edo period, which took place between 1603 and 1868, the go-to form of punishment for nonviolent crimes was a tattoo right in the center of your forehead. It was called a tattoo penalty and was given to perpetrators of relatively minor crimes like theft and burglary. It was classified as a type of corporal punishment along with caning. Oftentimes the penalty was accompanied by an expulsion of the area. It also served as a deterrent both due to the pain of getting your face tattooed and also being publicly displayed as a criminal for the rest of your life. It also had a record-keeping purpose. As you can see in the photo to the bottom left, the style of tattoos chosen by each region individually. That way people could also know what area the convict was from. Also in the bottom image we can see a sort of 3 strikes policy. In Hiroshima, where each crime got 1 strike per offense, and in most regions if the tattoo person was a repeat offender, then the penalty would be death. No prisons existed in the Edo period until the development of large cities like Osaka and Edo, better known today as Tokyo, which led to an increase in crime. Before then, amputation of the nose or ear was punishment back in the day. I think I'd rather have a tattoo in the middle of my forehead than have my nose cut off, but hey, that's just me. In 1745, tattooing replaced amputation as a form of punishment. Hallelujah. This continued over the years, with face tattoos changing to the less embarrassing and, to be honest, somewhat fashionable armband tattoos displayed in the photo to the left up top. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's how they would identify how many strikes they had, but it really isn't nearly as embarrassing as being put in the middle of the forehead. In 1872, the newly established government of Japan abolished the tattoo penalty once and for all, and oddly enough, right in the middle of all this, around the early 1800s, body art suddenly became all the rage with the common people of Japan, and although tattoos may not be commonplace in Japan present day, they actually are growing in popularity once again. So on to the 19th century. In the period shortly after the American Revolution, to avoid impressment by British naval ships, sailors used government-issued protection papers to establish their American citizenship. However, many of the descriptions of the individual described in the Seamen's Protection Certificates were so general that it was very easy to abuse the system, and many impressment officers of the Royal Navy simply paid no attention to them. So one way of making them more specific and effective was to describe a tattoo which is highly personal as to the subject and location, and thus use as a description to precisely identify that seaman. As a result, many of the official certificates were also carried information about tattoos, scars, and any other specific identifying information. This also led to an increase in tattoos among the American seamen who wanted to, obviously, they wanted to avoid the impressment by the royal soldiers. During this period, tattoos were not popular among the rest of the country, simply just the sailors, and frequently the protection papers made reference to the tattoos as clear evidence that the individual was a seafaring man. However, it was rare that the members of the general public would adorn themselves with tattoos the way sailors did. In 1870, the first tattoo shop opens in London. Around 1870, D.W. Purdy opened a tattooing shop in North London, thought to be the first professional studio in Great Britain. Purdy wrote, "Before you commence to tattoo any individual, you must be able to sketch well, as it is a very difficult matter to sketch in a person's arm or any other part of their body. You will have a good deal of rubbing out to do before you get the figure drawn correctly. Whatever part of the body you have to tattoo, you must see that there are no large veins in the way, as they must be avoided. Before you commence drawing out your figure, you must see that all hairs are shaved off, or you will have some difficulty trying to sketch." So you can kind of see this is the first really official tattoo parlor ever opened. The practice is very similar. You go into a tattoo parlor today, and it's the exact same process. They shave whatever area it is, sketch it out on your arm, even though there's computer programs for that now. During the 19th century, tattooing flourished in England like nowhere else in Europe. This was due to the tradition of tattooing in the British Navy, and like their American counterparts, many British seamen returned home bearing souvenirs of their travels in the forms of exotic tattoos. So whereas the American seamen were doing it to avoid impressment, British naval soldiers were doing it just to show the proof of their exotic travels. Tattooing actually gained royal sanction in 1862 when the Prince of Wales visited the Holy Land and had a Jerusalem cross tattooed on his arm. Later in life, King Edward VII acquired a number of traditional tattoos, and then when his sons visited Japan in 1882, he instructed their tutor to take them to the tattoo master Hori Shio, who tattooed designs on their arms, and on their way home the two dukes actually visited Jerusalem and were tattooed by the same artist that had tattooed their father 20 years earlier. So then you know, during this time you kind of are seeing the royals get into the tattooing, so it's definitely becoming more popular at this point in Britain. 1891, the first tattoo machine. In 1876, Thomas Alva Edison of Newark, New Jersey, you may have heard of him, received a patent on a device designed to ease the workload of office secretaries. This patent was used for an electromagnetic machine that would engrave hard surfaces in order to make stencils. The stencil pen would then punch holes into the original document with the help of an ink roller, and then copies could be made. 15 years later, the first patent for a tattoo machine was filed by Samuel O'Reilly, who was actually inspired by Edison's creation. The O'Reilly modifications included a redesigned tube assembly and an ink reservoir. In a tube assembly with the ink chamber, an on-off switch, and a stroke adjustment. In 1929, Percy Waters received a patent on what a current-day tattoo machine looks like. Modifications included a fingertip on-off switch and a few other small modifications. And then during the Waters actually was the first person to sell his tattoo machine, and he was really able to sell thousands, so he's really the only one that made a marketable device. And it wasn't actually until 50 years later that the next tattoo machine patent was registered in 1979 to Carol Nightingale, and she built a much more elaborate device, as you can see in the photo all the way, or in the design all the way to the right. It included full adjustability coils, leaf springs of different lengths, an angle bar, that way it didn't get in the way of the front spring. And then over the years, tattoo artists have actually made their own alterations to machines. The tattoo machine, which I actually didn't know, is a very personalized tool, and it's very rare you see two that are exactly the same, so pretty much every tattoo artist kind of makes their own modifications to their machines. The 1940s. During the Holocaust, concentration camp prisoners received tattoos only at one location, the Auschwitz concentration camp complex. Incoming prisoners were assigned the camp serial number, which was sewn into their prison uniforms. Only those prisoners selected for work were issued serial numbers. Those prisoners sent directly to the gas chambers were not registered and received no tattoos. Initially, the SS authorities marked prisoners who were first in the infirmary or who were to be executed with their camp serial number across their chest with indelible ink. As prisoners were executed or died in other ways, their clothing bearing the camp serial number was removed. Given the mortality rate at the camp and practice of removing clothing, there was no way to identify the bodies after the clothing was removed, hence the introduction of the practice of tattooing in order to identify the bodies. Horrible practice. Originally a metal stamp holding an interchangeable number made up of needles approximately 1 centimeter long was used, and this allowed a whole serial number to be punched in one blow to the prisoner's upper left chest. Ink was then rubbed into the bleeding wound, which was very similar to how they did it during the Edo time period. When the metal stamp method proved impractical, a single needle device was introduced which pierced the outline of the serial number digits into the skin. 1961, a ban on tattoos due to the hepatitis outbreak ensued. In 1961, New York City declared it unlawful for any person to tattoo a human being, a prohibition that remained on the books for nearly 4 decades until the city finally re-legalized the tattoo trade in 1997, which really was not that long ago. The story of New York City's tattoo ban began as a public health pretext to hound an unpopular activity out of existence. Pointing to a non-existent link between tattooing and a minor outbreak of hepatitis B, city health officials went on to attack, declaring the tattoo industry as unsafe from a public health point of view. According to the government, only a total ban would save its citizenry. A little extreme, if you ask me. In the 1950s, there was a minor outbreak of hepatitis B, and the link was somehow created between a group of Coney Island tattoo parlors and the outbreak, and the ban on New York City tattoo parlors would last 36 years before being revoked. Lastly, in 2006, Oklahoma becomes the last state to remove a ban on tattoo parlors, which, I mean, if you really think about it, that's 8 years ago. They were the last state to make tattoos legal when the governor signed legislation on Wednesday to license and regulate tattoo artists and parlors. This actually ended a ban on tattooing that had been in effect since 1963, and it called for extreme guidelines, sanitation guidelines, and the health department endorsed the measure after expressing concern about increase in hepatitis infections related to unsanitary tattoo practices, even though there really was no proof that tattoo parlors were the cause of the hepatitis outbreak. So on to the fun part, the evolution of different tattoo styles. And trying to make a list of tattoo styles is like trying to make a list of every culture on earth. There's overlap, there's contention, however there are definitely distinct styles, and some of them include traditional Asian flash tattoos, which are those colorful ones you see on the walls of tattoo parlors, and even biomechanical tattoos, which I'll get to a little later. Let's take a closer look at the different styles and where they got their influence from. Asian cultures, especially the Japanese, are truly regarded as the godfather of sorts for tattooing. It is difficult to kind of lump all Asian tattoos into one section, so I'm going to split into three. There's Asian, traditional Asian, modern Asian, and then lettering. Traditional Asian tattoos usually resemble something spiritual for the person. Modern Asian tattoos are reminiscent of traditional and often feature prominent images like the koi fish, dragons, and phoenixes, which you can kind of see in a lot of these photos. Koi fishes especially are popular, and I know a lot of tattoo artists, it's actually one of their favorite things to do because they can kind of use their own creativity interpretation of it. And then lettering style is very common and can even fall under the flash category, which is, you know, just when people get the symbols that represent a word. Biomechanical tattoos. So believe it or not, the history of this style of tattooing is actually traced back to a single movie, Alien. And whether or not the Alien movies were the source of biomechanical tattoos, the imagery can't help but make one think of them. For the hardcore sci-fi fanatics, the biomechanical tattoos generally portray some combination of human and robotic parts intertwined. So in these pictures you can kind of see how, you know, different tattoo artists interpret it. You have, you know, the guy with the head tattoo, which doesn't look as realistic, but then you have the one where the skin is being torn. It looks like underneath his skin is actually something mechanical. I think that this is just a fascinating type of tattoo. Then there's the traditional black and gray, and any tattoo can be completed in black and gray, but it actually is a style in and of itself, and there's two specific branches. The first is has come to be known as a prison or biker tattoo, seen in the images of the skull to the left. It goes back to the American prison system where colored ink was actually impossible to come by, so they kind of made do with just the black and gray. The other major branch of black and gray is known as fine line, which you can kind of see in the portrait of Jesus, and it's also known as the Chicano style. This style originated in the Hispanic communities of East LA during the 70s, and it features fine line and great depth of shading. This is also one of the favorites for most tattoo artists. Celtic tattoos. So they're actually composed of large black lines and are generally only done by experienced Celtic tattoo artists, which I didn't know. I guess because of their complexity, it's very, very difficult to get this really accurate. Celtic tattoos originated as a form of war paint, and the subjects of a Celtic tattoo are often symbols such as the Celtic knot and animals, and another common one is are actually the trees, which you can see in the photo in the middle. Flash tattoos. So everyone's seen them. They're the ones that are on the walls of the tattoo parlor, and they're just simple stock designs that they usually have posted, and a client can kind of just walk in, point to one, and within a couple of hours they can have the mock-up drawn and actually tattooed on the person in, you know, like I said, in a matter of hours. You often see like roses, butterflies, hearts, skulls. Caricatures. So these tattoos are exactly what caricatures are to drawn portraits, so it's just a mocking version of the actual person. Colors are usually loud, flash patterns, and feature other, a recognizable piece of art or a person, just with some sort of joking, added effect. And it's safe to bet that people who choose to ink themselves with these have a good sense of humor, especially the one with the Joker. I find that a little odd, but hey, to each his own. Tribal tattoos, also very common. You see these on the walls of tattoo parlors. They actually are one of the oldest forms of tattooing, and they actually started with a historical meaning in Polynesia. But neo-tribal tattoos, which are what you see now, burst into the scene in the late 80s and kind of borrowed designs from Polynesian influence, making them into mainstream bold designs. And it doesn't really have any tribal meaning anymore. It's just called a tribal tattoo. Photorealistic. So this is my absolute favorite type of tattooing. I find it mind-boggling. They're actually a pretty recent phenomenon in tattooing for two reasons. First, the tattooing has become more popular and the skill level of artists has actually increased. And also the technology of the inks and the guns has progressed to a point where doing fine levels of detail has become possible. I mean, it looks like that spider is actually crawling on that girl's back, and that would freak me out if I saw that in person. So realistic tattoos are often portraits of people, like you see in the top two photos, or wildlife, like in the spider photo is very common. I find the one with the guy's throat extremely disturbing as well. But yeah, like I said, I think this is just so cool, and you have to be tremendously talented to do this. So traditional American tattoos is actually the last style of tattoo we're going to talk about, and it's actually reminiscent of the 19th century, what we discussed earlier, when sailors began getting tattoos to avoid impression by the British Royal Navy. Big, bold sections of black and solid colors are featured in these designs, and they usually revolve around nature, sailing, reflections in love. Common images include anchors, pinup girls, sailboats, things like that. Pinup girls you kind of see the most. Even those you kind of see on the walls of like most tattoo parlors. So this is the end of our multi-millennium journey on the history of tattoos. I hope you enjoyed your experience, and now it's time to go locate your nearest tattoo parlor, make an appointment, and do something reckless. Just kidding, but I hope you enjoyed.